The last lantern. Some towns vanish from the map because of floods or fires or progress. Cold Hollow simply faded. The snow buried it. The wind erased the paths, and the people stopped speaking its name. But on the longest nights of winter, a single lantern still burns at the edge of the frozen lake. They say if you follow it, you'll never come back. Tonight, Jonathan Barrett is about to find out why. The winter of 1911 had been the coldest anyone in Dryden could remember. The frost clung to windows like white lace, and the sky stayed the color of lead from dawn until night. Jonathan Barrett, a 27-year-old schoolteacher, had moved to town only 2 months earlier. He'd taken a room above the local mercantile, where the walls groaned in the wind and the wood stove never quite chased the chill away. The locals were polite, but distant. They talked freely about the weather, the price of coal, and the upcoming church social. But whenever Jonathan mentioned the road north, their eyes went flat. He learned quickly not to ask about Cold Hollow. Still, curiosity had a way of chewing at him in the long, dark hours after school. One evening, Mrs. Henley, the shopkeeper's wife, handed him his change and hesitated. "If you're walking after dark," she said, voice low, "and you see a lantern swinging, turn away." She didn't explain. She just pressed her lips together and busied herself with the till. It might have ended there, just another piece of small-town superstition, if not for the blizzard that came 2 weeks later. The storm shut down the school and left the town blanketed in silence. Jonathan, restless, bundled up and set out for a walk along the river road. The snow muffled his footsteps. The cold bit through his scarf, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. That's when he saw it, a pale yellow light swaying gently in the wind far ahead on the ice-bound path toward Cold Hollow. Jonathan stopped. The wind sighed through the bare branches, and the light swayed once, twice, then began to drift slowly away, always just far enough that he couldn't make out its source. It was probably nothing. A farmer heading home. A boy playing with an old oil lamp. But something in the movement felt deliberate, too slow to be urgent, too steady to be careless. He stepped off the packed road and into the deeper snow, following the light. Each step made the leather of his boots creak. Each breath came in clouds that hung in the air before fading into the dark. The lantern kept its distance, and the silence deepened until the only sound was the faint jingle of something metal, maybe the clasp on its handle. Jonathan told himself he'd turn back at the ridge. But when he reached it, the light was waiting at the bottom of the slope, swinging in lazy arcs. He descended, boots sliding on the icy path. The trees here were older, taller, their trunks black against the snow. And as he passed between them, the air felt heavier, as if the forest were holding its breath. The lantern moved again, drawing him onward. Then, without warning, the snow underfoot gave way to the frozen surface of a lake. It stretched wide and still beneath the weak moonlight, and in the middle stood the figure tall, motionless, holding the lantern high. The wind cut sharper here, whistling over the ice. Jonathan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stop. But the figure turned and began to walk, steps light and soundless, leading him toward the far shore. He followed. Halfway across, the ice groaned beneath his boots. The sound was deep, hollow, and ancient, like the earth itself shifting. Jonathan froze. The figure stopped too, then slowly raised its free hand, pointing down into the black beneath the ice. Jonathan peered through the frost, At first, he saw nothing. Then shapes began to emerge, faces pale and distorted, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. Dozens of them, pressed against the underside of the ice, frozen in place. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. The cold bit deep into his skin, but his body felt locked in place, as if the air itself had turned solid. The faces under the ice weren't still. They shifted, slow as weeds in deep water, their hands pressing upward, fingertips white against the frozen ceiling. Their eyes fixed on him, each gaze heavy, each mouth silently forming words he couldn't hear. He stumbled backward, boots scraping the frost, the groan of the ice following each step. The lantern's glow brightened, spilling out across the lake until it lit the faces in sharp, ghastly detail. Frost rimmed their lashes, and hair floated weightless around their skulls, as if they were still submerged. The figure on the far shore took a single step forward. Jonathan could see it more clearly now. Its clothes were wrong. Not tattered, not filthy, but old. Heavy wool coat, brass buttons, and boots polished to a shine. Its head was bare, hair dark and slicked back, though no snow clung to it. The lantern hung from one hand, but its other arm was outstretched, palm up, as though offering him something unseen. Jonathan turned to run, but his heel struck a patch of bare ice, sending him crashing to his knees. The shock of the cold rattled his bones. When he looked up, the figure was closer. The light now burned too brightly to look at directly, searing spots into his vision. Shadows stretched and twisted across the lake, curling around him like grasping fingers. The ice beneath him gave a sharp, cracking report, not a groan of fracture. He scrambled forward, boots slipping, palms raw against the frozen surface. Another crack, this time closer. The faces below followed him, their mouths moving faster now, their eyes wide with something like hunger. Then he heard it. A voice, but not spoken inside his head. Stay. Jonathan's heart pounded so hard it drowned out the wind. That single word still echoed in his skull low, cold, certain. The figure's boots made no sound as it moved closer. The light didn't flicker. It pulsed, slow and deliberate, in rhythm with Jonathan's heartbeat. Every time it flared, the faces below pressed harder against the ice, as though trying to force their way upward. He crawled faster, the skin on his palms burning from the frostbite beginning to set in. His breath came in ragged bursts, and each exhale fogged the air so thick it felt like he was breathing through cloth. Another voice joined the first, then another. Soon, the inside of his head was filled with overlapping whispers, pleading, coaxing, promising. They spoke of warmth, of rest, of never feeling the cold again. The ice popped sharply under him, and for a heartbeat, he saw a spiderweb of cracks race out in every direction. Water welled up through one of them, black and slick against the pale frost. Jonathan lurched to his feet, slipping again, but somehow staying upright. His eyes locked on the far shore. Just a few dozen yards. He could make it. The figure moved again, but this time it didn't walk. It glided, the lantern swaying gently in its grasp. It was no longer ahead of him. It was beside him. Then, impossibly, it was in front of him again. Jonathan skidded to a stop. His mind screamed to run, but his body wouldn't move. The figure leaned closer, and for the first time, Jonathan saw its face skin pale as bone, lips faintly blue, eyes an endless, watery black. One step, the voice whispered, silk over ice. Beneath him, the faces smiled. He realized too late that his boots were no longer on solid ice. The cracks had widened into a gaping hole, and the lake was waiting. The cold seized him before the water did. One moment he was standing, the next his legs were swallowed whole, dragged down through jagged shards of ice. The lake's surface rose around him, closing like teeth. The shock stole his breath instantly. It wasn't just cold, it was a deep, crushing cold that bit into the marrow of his bones. His body convulsed, panic clawing at him, but every movement only dragged him further into the black. Shapes moved in the water. Not fish. Not weeds, the faces. They swam with impossible speed, hair streaming like banners, mouths stretching open in perfect silence. Their hands reached for him, not to pull him up, but to hold him still. The figure with the lantern leaned over the hole, its pale face framed by the glow. That light did not touch the water, it only lit Jonathan's sinking body, as if marking him for the others. He kicked hard, muscles burning, lungs screaming for air. But the cold had stolen his strength. Every kick was weaker than the last. Then he felt it, a hand wrapping around his ankle, another around his wrist, a third curling into his hair. Their touch was neither violent nor gentle, just final. Jonathan's vision dimmed. The lantern's light above blurred into a dull gold smear. His last breath burst from his chest in a cloud of bubbles that rose, then slowed, then stopped, frozen mid-ascent like the faces below. The last thing he saw before the black took him was the figure lowering the lantern into the water, the flame somehow burning bright beneath the surface. The whispers quieted, and the lake became still. When spring came, the thaw revealed nothing. No coat, no boots, no trace of Jonathan at all. Locals said the lake was bottomless in the center, that it could swallow a body and never give it back. But the old men at the diner knew better. They'd seen the glow on winter nights, the same dull gold pulse drifting beneath the ice, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Some swore the faces were still there, pressed against the glassy surface just before the freeze broke. And if you looked long enough, one of them had Jonathan's eyes. The figure with the lantern? No one agreed on what it was. A warning, a guide, or the thing that fed the lake in the first place. What they did agree on was this: when the wind drops to nothing on a winter night, and the lake falls silent, you don't cross it. You don't even step on the shore. Because if the ice groans under your feet, it's not the cold you need to fear. It's the whisper. Darkness doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it stands in plain sight, waiting for you to take that one step too far. And when you do, there's no running back.